With me I have Dr. Uri Davis, a leading academic and human rights activist who is also one of the first people of Jewish origin to be elected to the Revolutionary Council of Fatah, a movement once dominated by the Palestinian Liberation Organization President Yasser Arafat. Dr. Davis, thank you very much for joining us here on RT. You describe yourself as an anti-Zionist Palestinian Hebrew. Why then live in Israel?
You would be aware that there was a small constituency inside the white community in South Africa that broke away from the values of apartheid and crossed the political boundary and joined the ANC in various capacities. There is a voice of one's conscience, and people who cross the political boundary the way I did with reference to the PLO, their voice of conscience may be a bit more emphatic than the voice of conscience of other people.
You have always compared Israel with apartheid South Africa, and yet there are important differences. Arabs who live inside Israel can vote, whereas non-white South Africans never could. At the same time, Israeli Arabs can live anywhere they want inside the Jewish state, whereas black South Africans were forced to live in townships and homelands.
I did my PhD in the United States, and I'm aware of the ugliness of xenophobia and popular racism in North America. So as far as popular racism and xenophobia goes, I think official representatives of Israel are right. It is incorrect to single out the state of Israel on that basis. But that is not quite apartheid. Apartheid is racism regulated through acts of parliament and enforced through the law enforcement instruments of the state. So there is a formal overlap in terms of the legal system, and the legal system is exactly the element that differs or differentiates apartheid systems from other systems. There is also a serious overlap with the end result of the system. In South Africa, to my information, about 87% of the territory of the apartheid republic was designated in law for whites only. The apartheid divide in law being between white and non-white. In Israel, pre-67 Israel within the lines known as the Green Lines, the Armistice Lines of 1949, 93%, not 87, 93% are designated in law for Jews only. The apartheid divide in law being between Jew and non-Jew.
Another important difference is that Palestinian Arabs are represented in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and they also have full access to the Supreme Court. You never had that in South Africa, where non-white South Africans had access to the government and the legal system.
5 million Palestinian Arab refugees today have the right to Israel citizenship, and their citizenship rights have been nullified under the absentee property law of 1950. So against 5 million people whose citizenship has been nullified, you've got 1.5 million people who have the right to vote. I suggest to you that as far as Israeli apartheid is concerned, an effective instrument in suggesting that the state of Israel is not an apartheid state, or to be more precise, falsely suggesting that the state of Israel is not an apartheid state, but the only democracy in the Middle East.
You support the notion of a Jewish state, and you've actually said that you want to suggest to your colleagues in Fatah that there's nothing to fear in that whole notion. But many of them would argue that a Jewish state, by definition, is a racist concept. So why then do you support it?
Given my strategic political perspective, a solution on the basis of all UN resolution, there is no way that I can deny the legitimacy of the idea of the Jewish state. What I resist is the Zionist interpretation of that idea. It means that its borders are 1947 borders and not 1967 and beyond. It means that it's a binational state. UN Resolution 181 actually draws the planks of a democratic constitution for the Jewish state and the Arab state. It means economic union among three components. To my reading, it basically means the formation of a unitary state model, something like Belgium.
So why did you decide to join Fatah?
Fatah was the only formation, the only movement that was at core liberal at core international and accepted membership on the basis of agreement with the mainstay of its political program. With reference to Fatah or the PLO being regarded as the enemy of the Hebrew people in Israel or the apartheid state of Israel, well, that should be analyzed, regarded and assessed again in context. The ANC was similarly regarded by the apartheid state, but it did not prevent people of conscience joining the ANC in order to liberate South Africa from apartheid.
If Fatah went to war against Israel, would you support Fatah?
You may be aware that international law stipulates that people under occupation and people who are people that's at the receiving end, people victimized by ethnic cleansing, have the right to resist the occupation, to resist apartheid. Apartheid is a crime under the International Convention for the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid through political means, educational means, cultural means, diplomatic means, as well as armed resistance.
You are one of the only people of Jewish origin to be elected to such a high-ranking position within Fatah. You were placed 31st from among 600 candidates. But do you really think you can make a difference, or is your appointment merely symbolic?
Until the ethnic cleansing, until the 1948-49 war, communities were not as segregated as they are under Israeli apartheid. And mixed marriages in every direction, Muslim-Jewish, Muslim-Christian, Christian-Muslim, Christian-Jewish, whatever combination, were not uncommon. There are quite a few members of Fatah movement, including Revolutionary Council and Central Committee, who are of Jewish origin, namely have a parent or a grandparent classified under Orthodox Jewish law as Jews. It may be that I'm the first person of Jewish origin and European origin that's been elected to the Revolutionary Council.
You've used the term ethnic cleansing several times in the interview, referring, of course, to the War of Independence in 1948 when Israel was established. But many Arabs chose to leave Israel voluntarily, and those who stayed behind were incorporated into the country, which is why we have Israeli or Palestinian Arabs today.
The only difference between Haram Sayyidina Ali and Kfar Shmaryahu in 1948 and the families who stayed in Tel Aviv versus the family who left Tel Aviv in 1991 is that in the first case the people who left were Arabs, and in the second case the people who left were Jews.
But many Israelis today are in the same situation. Many of them came as refugees from Europe or Arab countries, and they didn't receive any kind of compensation or any kind of special status from the countries they left behind. So why should the Palestinians?
There is a significant difference, even if I'd go along with what I regard to be an inaccurate narrative, because Jewish institutions and Jewish families actually do make restitution claims for property destroyed or confiscated in the Second World War by the Nazi regime. But even if I went along with that narrative, there is one right which is not denied to them, of which you may be aware: the right of return. Second and third generation men and women who were born to refugees, Jewish refugees of the Second World War, refugees who arrived in Israel or arrived in Palestine before the State of Israel was established, are queuing before the embassies of Germany, Poland, Hungary, etc.,